I am here at Microsoft Ignite with Michael Niehaus, Program Manager for Autopilot. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
So, you have been around in the world of OS deployment for a while, and Autopilot is the new way of deploying Windows 10. How is the reception in the field on this new way of deploying Windows?
There's been a lot of interest. You could probably tell from the sessions here at Ignite with overflowing rooms in some pretty big halls, so lots of people trying to figure out what it is, what it means to them, and what we see on the back end, kind of watching all of the devices be registered and deployed, is a lot of people kicking the tires, trying it out, seeing how it works, and then slowly starting into broader deployments with it.
So, and Autopilot being this new thing, we've seen a lot of things happening with Windows deployment. We've seen provisioning packages, for instance, coming. It was kind of big. I don't hear anything about it anymore. Is that still a thing that's being developed, or is Autopilot completely new compared to what was happening with provisioning packages at the time?
Sure. I mean, the positioning is sort of a little different. So for provisioning packages, the idea is that a device is going to be set up by an IT person, because the process of installing a provisioning package isn't really something that the end user would want to do. But as an IT-driven process, it's still there, still works. We're still making enhancements to it. It's just more focused on kind of the smaller businesses and education customers who don't mind that they see that as an improvement over the typically manual processes that they had done before. So they'll continue using that with things like Set Up School PCs, the app that's used to create a provisioning package to quickly set up a room full of school PCs, or obviously Windows Configuration Designer is still around as well. But for most larger organizations, we think it's much better to focus on a scenario that's automated. So not having IT touch the machine at all. Autopilot can enable that with the configuration being pushed from Intune. Behind the scenes, it's using the same stuff. The provisioning packages are built on top of the MDM stack. Intune can set those same configuration items directly. So that's really the difference between the two. Provisioning package is kind of an offline MDM blob that gets pushed onto the device. Intune would be the direct way to get those MDM settings on the device.
That makes sense. And how about the classic way of deploying Windows? Will we see improvements in that field as well, or is Autopilot the complete new focus, and will there be no more improvements on what we already have?
I'm sure you'll continue to see incremental improvements. We think we've done as much as we can as far as big features go, but that's not to say that there aren't little tweaks that we can make to make things easier. So we still work on things for MDT, for Config Manager OSD, so there's still work going on down those paths, and I think we'll actually see another MDT release in the coming months as we fix bugs and address customer feedback and keep doing things like that as well.
And the feedback, for instance, for MDT, is that also going through the channels that we currently have, like the feedback? There is Windows feedback. I forgot the name of it now.
MDT and Config Manager are owned by the same team, the Config Manager team. They use the user voice site, so it would be configurationmanager.uservoice.com.
So anyone who still wants to see improvements in that part, they can use user voice. One of the things that bugged me for a while, I'm not sure if it's still there, but there have been kind of issues with lots of modern applications on Windows 8, Windows 8.1 and Windows 10. Are those all on the radar as well to get solved?
We've been having lots of meetings around that recently to try to figure out what's the right thing to do for enterprise customers especially. So can we reduce the number of inbox apps? Can we not push as many apps when the user signs on, or not push any at all depending on what SKU you're running. So we are looking at that for the next release in the spring. We'll see what we can do for that release, but certainly it's something we hear a lot of feedback on and have been spending a lot of time on.
That's good to hear, because that's especially, well, what I heard. I'm currently at one of those corporate clients who are working with Windows 10, and what I hear, well, we install Windows 10 and then we get those inbox applications, and the first time when you log on, those applications have to be updated, and they cannot be updated from WSUS or SCCM. They have to go straight to the internet.
Fortunately, they do use delivery optimization, so they can do peer-to-peer, but yeah, certainly there are three main concerns that we have with the apps. One, are they appropriate? Two, how much network traffic is generated to update them, even if you're not using them? And the third is the performance impact, especially on the initial logons after you get into Windows 10. Just the checking to see if there are updates available can impact the CPU load on the device. So we're looking at all three of those and seeing if there are ways that we can address those.
I think the day before yesterday I had a very interesting conversation with one of the Windows deployment MVP, so to say, and he says Autopilot is nice technology, but it's not yet ready for production. Do you expect that Autopilot will be ready for the real thing, so to say, within 6 months?
I would twist their words around a little bit and say Autopilot is ready for production, but Autopilot's not yet ready for all organizations. More like all organizations aren't yet ready for Autopilot. Because to move to Autopilot, you're moving to Intune and potentially Config Manager co-management added on top of that. Maybe Azure Active Directory, maybe hybrid Azure AD join, which is really Active Directory join. But to do that requires you to be ready for the cloud. It requires that you think about, where am I going to configure my settings? I mean, ideally you would move away from group policy and shift to Intune, which is no small feat. As you look at moving to Azure Active Directory, that's not a small change either. So we have a lot of large organizations that are full speed ahead and already deploying into that. So certainly it's ready for production. But that doesn't mean we don't at the same time hear from all of the companies that say, oh, well, we don't think we can get there for a year or 18 months or 2 years because we have all of these things that we need to do first. Great, do all of those things first. We're not going anywhere. But for a lot of companies, they look at the Windows 10 migration that they're just getting into as a big opportunity for them to do a lot of these changes at the same time. So for those that got the head start on Windows 10 and were ready to deploy, they could then look at Autopilot as a way to simplify that process. Now, if you're the company that's still on Windows 7 and you're just starting to look at Windows 10, it's total panic mode at this point because you're running out of time. So for those, they might look at Autopilot and all the other changes and say, oh my God, there's no way that I can do all that. So yeah, it's going to depend, and we don't expect every organization to move to that yet. Over time, sure.
And what about the OEMs? I suppose, well, there was, I think there were 5 OEMs announced in the beginning, and the number is about to grow. But as a customer, I've seen that OEMs may have a hard time with providing you with the right version of Windows 10 on what they deliver. Have you heard anything about being in sync with what customers expect to get delivered, especially as far as goes to the Windows 10 version that you have to deliver on your systems?
It is a tough problem because most of the OEMs will move to the new Windows 10 release within 90 days of its release for new devices that are being manufactured. That's part of their agreement with Microsoft to move to those new releases. Obviously, that doesn't match up with what enterprises want. A lot of enterprises want N-1, N-2, sometimes even earlier than that. So you can generally request that from an OEM, but what comes pre-installed on a typical device, might still be newer. We are still having conversations to say, well, maybe we can adjust the rules for commercial devices where you don't necessarily want the latest and greatest within 90 days of the release. Maybe that time window could be 6 months or something like that. So we're having those conversations, but in the meantime, most of the OEMs say, well, just talk to us and we can work something out where we'll put a clean image on the system of whatever Windows release you want. Now, that's not to say they're not going to put a charge on that as part of the service that they're providing to do that, but they are generally flexible when it comes to doing that sort of thing.
And can you share something on what's on the roadmap for Autopilot for the time to come?
Sure. Yeah, we talked about the roadmap for a few items here at Ignite. One of them was to make improvements to the enrollment status page that displays progress as the device is being configured. There are some things we don't track on that page right now, so we need to add those into the page. We talked about a new scenario called White Glove, where we want to be able to kind of split the provisioning process in two, so that part of it could be done by IT or a partner, and then the device boxed back up and sent to the user, so that instead of sitting there waiting for 2 hours while all the software gets downloaded to the machine, it's already there. So they turn the machine on, they sign on, and after any user policies and user data sync down to the device, they can be productive. So after a couple of minutes instead of a couple of hours. So those are the main focuses for the next release coming in the spring.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time for being here, and hopefully see you again at one of the next conferences.
Thanks a lot. I hope to be at every Ignite.
So do I.